a new media-oriented podcast with tech overtones. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro. PDF editing for your Mac, iPhone, and iPad. Find out more at smilesoftware.com/podcast. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, sometimes schedules just don't line up, and sometimes we just don't get to talk to the people we want to talk to, but I'm going to fix one of those right now as I try to. Whenever I find I'm making a mistake, I try to fix it. We get to spend some time with Charlotte Henry of the Mac Observer. Charlotte, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back. Yes, it's been far too long. Lucky nothing dramatic has happened between the times we've spoken, you know.
Oh, no, nothing at all. No, the world has been completely calm. So in between times, though, you have started a new podcast for the Mac Observer.
Yeah, we've launched a podcast called Media Plus, which, as you probably have guessed, looks at the kind of digital media space. And obviously it's a bit of a play on that everyone who launches a streaming service has to call it Plus. Since I think 3 services have launched since I started the podcast, at least 2 or 3 more services have started called something Plus. We had Discovery Plus, Paramount Plus, never mind Apple News Plus and Disney Plus and all the rest of it. So yeah, we've been looking at that. We don't only talk about streaming, TV streaming. We've looked at issues around podcasts and the podcast industry, newsletters and Substack and review and those kind of things. Clubhouse, which I think, are you a fan of Clubhouse, Chuck?
I know of Clubhouse. I have not experienced Clubhouse yet.
Let's keep it that way. It's fine. We've talked about a whole different subject. So I'm always lucky to have a really interesting guest on. We've also looked at we've appointed Brian Chaffin, who is the Mac Observer's editor-in-chief. We've appointed him Media Plus's official award season correspondent. So every few weeks he dusts off his tux and comes on the show and, looks at how Apple TV Plus is doing in the world of award season. And basically the answer is Ted Lasso, normally.
So, do we have any pictures of Brian in a tux?
We can speak off air.
Okay. All right, good. Because I'd love to get a hold of those.
No, we can do a deal.
Okay. I mean, do you require Brian to do wear a tux while he's doing the podcast?
Yeah, it's an essential part of the show, yeah.
Okay, good. I'll look forward to that. I have to admit, when you said that you were starting this particular podcast, Media Plus, I found it really interesting because most of us know you through the Mac Observer as a tech journalist. You have a whole other audience, though, that knows you as more of a political journalist. And so this is like a third prong for you. I realize there's some overlap with the tech, but yeah. What happened? I mean, how did this come to be?
I kind of think it all fits together rather nicely, actually, whether it's the kind of documentary style stuff or the media regulation stuff or just kind of the way, as you rightly just said, tech and media have completely overlapped now. Is Apple a media company? Is it a tech company? Well, it's kind of both now, isn't it, really, if we're being honest? And so it all just kind of came together and the bosses at the Mac Observer were kind enough to let me kind of run with it. So it's been fun.
Well, I think it's great because I feel like that you would bring a fresher perspective than a lot of folks who are completely steeped in one or the other, that the political background gives you a kind of a different view on the media landscape, I would think.
Yeah, it probably does. But I've covered the media industry a bit before as well. So it kind of all came together nicely. And we kind of realized at the Mac Observer that there was quite a big change happening within Apple. And we're very keen to make sure we covered that fully for our readers.
So I've listened to several episodes of Media Plus, and one of the things that struck me early. Shortly. Oh boy. Well, see, I blew it with Brian's tux, so I didn't know about that. But no, one of the things that struck me, Charlotte, was that you are not just looking at U.S. media or the tech media or the European media. And the reason I brought that up is because at one of the episodes, or one or two, you've been discussing some of the aspects of Australia. And that's something that we just don't do, it's unfortunately here in the U.S., we so seldom hear about what's going on in Australia, and yet it's obviously a significant market for a lot of things.
And obviously there's for all sorts of reasons, a relatively close relationship between Australia and the UK, despite the distances between the countries. But part of this was because, and actually it's a really good example, and we could dive into it, of how the politics, media and tech all come together really nicely, for me at least, is the story of Facebook having a row with news companies in Australia. And it was seen as a bit of a test case. The Australian government put forward, there was a whole bargaining thing going on, basically trying to get Facebook to pay for news. And the Australian government was involved. Big media corporations, including that run by Rupert Murdoch, was involved. It was like quite a fraught situation with there was a lot of big egos at play, I get the impression, having read about it, which, given the figures involved, you won't be surprised about. And there was a point where kind of for a few days, there was no news on Facebook in Australia. You literally couldn't access news links via Facebook at all in the country. And I think it also impacted Australian outlets. So if, say, me in the UK, someone had posted a link to, I think, the Sydney Morning Herald or something, someone's going to email me telling me I've got the name of that newspaper wrong now. But, a major Australian outlet, it wouldn't appear on Facebook. They just disappeared. And basically, as I say, it was because the news providers wanted Facebook to pay, basically. And obviously they've now come to some deal and whatever, and everyone's playing nicely again. But it was pretty fraught for a few days. And part of the reason, actually, I say it was a nice kind of mix of everything was because obviously one of the key players at Facebook now is Sir Nick Clegg, who was the Deputy Prime Minister in this country, who was the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party in this country, who's now Facebook's kind of lobbying chief, if you like. And I was involved for a number of years with the Liberal Democrat Party. I've interviewed Nick Clegg. I've met, I know that party and him and some of the, I know that part of... I know him and kind of that operation relatively well. So it was really interesting watching him in that mode as well and kind of being able to bring that perspective to that story. So it was an interesting one to watch play out. And I suspect it's not going to be the end of the row between platforms sharing news links and news providers.
So, let's go into this just a little bit, because I too watched it from a distance, not with obviously paying as much attention as if it had been in the U.S., but I try to figure out whether this is a win, if it's a win or a loss, and a win and loss for who. Obviously, the newspaper outlets want people to link to their stories, to pay attention to them. We hear a lot about, people should not be getting their news from Facebook. And yet here we have a situation where Facebook shut it down, and, that didn't seem to work. We have all the discussions over an open internet versus the walled gardens of Facebook and some other places.
You mean like Apple?
Well, not
the highest of walled gardens, some might.
The highest of walled gardens, but I don't put it quite in the same category, simply because usually the walled garden with Apple we're talking about is apps and those kind of things, as opposed to news, whatever news means. I mean, yes, I know there's Apple News Plus, but the idea that, okay, I run this website and therefore I'm never going to quote you, Charlotte Henry, ever again. Does that hurt me because you're a popular commentator, or does it hurt you because what you're saying is not being said to my people?
Do you mean because it's stopped on a very popular social network?
Yeah.
Look, we work in the kind of information sharing, whether it's tech tips or media or tech news or whatever. That's what you and I both spend our time digging up and doing. And so I think we would probably all agree that the more information that you can get to people, the better. The problem, of course, on Facebook has been that, you can end up in a kind of rabbit warren where, nonsense information is given as much prominence as really credible information. That's obviously the mess. And also, if people are losing kind of ad revenue, and that was, I think, part of the objections, or has certainly been some of the objections, that basically classified advertising and so on has just disappeared because people are choosing to spend money on ads on Google and Facebook, for example, instead of putting them in a local newspaper. It's a very messy story to try and tell and try and unpack. And I might casually suggest that the likes of Mark Zuckerberg didn't really think about this when they first started their very powerful platforms.
Oh, I would agree with that. I think the platforms have evolved and changed in ways that none of us anticipated. I know a quick example. Early on, when Facebook or some other social platforms asked, hey, can we have your contacts so we can invite them and get them here? That a lot of us gave it up with complete innocence, not recognizing what we were doing. We were just excited over the platforms and excited to share. And, now it's turned into a bit of a privacy mess. This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software like PDFpen and PDFpen Pro. This time around, I want to tell you about PDFpen and security. Those PDFs that you are creating and manipulating with PDFpen might be your grandmother's secret recipe, or they might be your company's most confidential information. You want to be sure that they are secure, no matter what. With PDFpen, you can password protect a document with up to 256-bit AES encryption. You can also edit the permissions to restrict saving, printing, or copying. And if you want to redact or delete something from that confidential PDF, PDFpen doesn't just draw a black box over it so that it can be removed by someone else. It deletes it with a capital D, or redacts it so that not only is it not visible, the text is also removed from the OCR layer, so it simply isn't there. And if you need to sign a document, you can validate digital signatures for authenticity. Sign that form with either AATL or a self-signed certificate. And those are just the security features of PDFpen and PDFpen Pro. There is so much more. I want you to visit smilesoftware.com/podcast right now to learn all about everything PDFpen and PDFpen Pro can do, download a free demo, and find out why PDFpen is indispensable when it comes to dealing with PDFs. That's PDFpen and PDFpen Pro from Smile, the makers of world-class software, at smilesoftware.com/podcast. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. But the idea that the Facebook is trying to, you tell me, is that a form of censorship? If Facebook says I'm not going to put your content on my platform?
Well, ultimately, it's Facebook's club. If you want to be in it, you have to follow the rules, I guess. In the same way Apple has rules for, various things, or whether it's content moderation rules or App Store rules or whatever, you want to play and get the benefits of being on those platforms, you have to play by their rules. Now, there's a whole separate discussion for all of these things, of whether these platforms are too powerful. That's a sort of totally separate discussion, isn't it? But I think I would say that there is quite clearly a difference between something like Facebook and an Apple News or an Apple News Plus. So, because Facebook obviously is ultimately that the reason why publications want to be on Facebook, right, is to drive traffic to their website. The reason why Facebook wants you to be on Facebook is to stay on Facebook. Whereas, and with Apple News Plus, the Apple News Plus, the people, Apple wants you to stay within that app, right? And get a subscription. But I kind of think the subscription model of News Plus, I'd love to speak to a publisher about this, and it'll be something maybe we dig into in the future on Media Plus. But the way that content is presented on, say, an Apple News Plus, I think is to the publisher's benefit, and they certainly can make it to their benefit because they can make it look really nice, the magazines and so on. And also you saw something like the New York Times go, do you know what? We're not getting involved in this. We're not making enough money from it. All we want is pure subscriptions. We can pay the Apple 30% or whatever. And we're not going to be involved in Apple News anymore. And that's kind of okay. It works for them.
Okay, so, oh boy, it's a real challenge because the Apple News Plus, I guess I see that as one kind of platform.
Yeah.
That if Apple's having to pay, Apple is charging content providers to put their content on that platform. So,
and then charging subscribers for access to it.
Right. So is that any different than?
And presumably, I don't know the specifics of the deals because, Apple. But presumably part of the point is that if you're part of News Plus, if you're one of the publishers that is part of News Plus, the money flows back to you in some way.
But I feel like that's a little bit different animal than a social network that says it wants to be a news outlet too.
It's a completely different animal. And I think, I don't know if Facebook has ever wanted to be a news outlet. It has experimented with tabs and different news. And they might argue that was a way of trying to promote, credible, in inverted commas, news and so on. And also, let's be blunt, it's a way of keeping you within Facebook as well. So if you don't click, so that you don't have to click a link out or whatever. But so, yes, I do agree with you that the Apple News Plus model or even the Apple News app model is very different to how a Facebook or, Twitter again is a different thing, right? Because that purely is going through to someone's website.
Right. Right. And at the Apple News, okay, let's go to old media. The Apple News site, I tend to think of that more like a magazine that I was subscribed to.
Totally.
As opposed to Facebook that says, yeah, just come on in and here we have everything for you. And by the way, we're scraping all your personal information that we can possibly find so that we will feed you more of the things you like. So you will stay on the platform and therefore see more of our advertising.
Right. It's a totally different thing.
So do you see anything wrong with, from your perspective, do you see anything wrong with either model?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm a very happy Apple News Plus subscriber.
Okay. Are you comfortable? Are you a Facebook user at all?
I do use Facebook because A, it helps me keep in touch with people, and B, we use the Mac Observer. We have a Mac Observer Facebook page where we share our stories, and there's a nice community on there, with people discussing the stories and so on. I personally am finding less and less use for Facebook in my data, but I can totally understand why people still use it for, as I say, for the kind of things I'm talking about, like keeping in touch, being part of a local community group or things like that. I think that's what also gets lost in stories. When you look at the big media companies being upset with Facebook, you kind of lose how most people use Facebook, which is, a local residents group or supporters of their soccer team, something like that. That's, I think, mostly how people use Facebook, just kind of fairly innocuous kind of groups and keeping in touch with people they have known for a while.
And I have to wonder if that's a shift that's occurring within Facebook's usage that is not being fully appreciated. To your point, I know plenty of people that have just left Facebook in protest over some of the policies and procedures, but there's still an awful lot of people that use it. But I feel like it is being used a little bit differently. And I don't know I can't decide if that makes it prime territory for the kind of abuses that we saw during the presidential elections here in the US, or whether its fangs are being taken out because people don't take it quite as seriously and aren't looking to it as a news source the way they maybe once did.
I don't think you can argue that a platform or platforms that have the ability to not totally, but almost entirely silence the president of the United States, you can't argue their power is dwindling, I would say.
Okay, that's a very fair point. At the point
that, I feel like we're in a Harry Potter episode. We're trying not to say his name. But at the point at which a Twitter and a Facebook and an Instagram, obviously owned by Facebook, can go, no, President Trump, you're not on here anymore. That's rather showing the power dynamic, the power they have, I would say. Whatever was politics.
Okay, so at this point, I want to make sure that folks know we don't do politics here.
Exactly.
And this is not a political discussion. This is a media discussion. So if you think by uttering the word Trump or Biden or whatever that we're going down the political route, no, we're not.
No.
But Charlotte, you bring up an interesting point that
I'm using it as an example just of the power. It's actually a tech conversation because it's a demonstration of the power of the tech platforms.
So does that then? You're right. That silences them on those platforms, but does that just push them, the potential abusers, whoever they are, whichever side of the aisle they're on, out to their own sites, their own maybe media created or creations of media, so they don't have any controls, any not censorship. That's not can't find the word I'm looking for. But that okay, it's now my website and I get to say anything I want. And if I say the sky is green, the sky is green, and there's nobody there to sort of fact check me or challenge it, other than to do it on yet another website or another media outlet. Until
your Parler and Apple says you can't be in the App Store anymore because you've updated its rules. As another example.
Right, but there again, that's another platform that someone tried to co-opt as opposed to building their own.
Sure. But I mean, the point is that, we can go really down to the sort of origin story of all of this, and it's that we have two very big mobile platforms, an Android and iOS, and if you want your app particularly to have any reach, you have to be on the stores offered by those two platforms. Obviously, the open internet is a totally different thing, because you can make a website, right? But then we even saw things like didn't we see AWS threatening to pull the juice on some services? So it's very messy territory, and I go back to my earlier point. I'm not sure the people who founded these companies could have did foresee quite where it all led.
And to go back even further in the conversation, this is what intrigued me so much when you started this. Right. I thought, is this going to be not a gossip thing? That's not what I mean, but just a review of Apple TV Plus and what's on Netflix this month. And you've really taken it a whole different direction, because there are a lot of these discussions that need to be had. And they are tech discussions, because, as you said, tech and media now overlap so thoroughly that you don't necessarily realize just how much. Your example of a platform or two being able to silence the president of the United States is a perfect example.
Yeah, and look, let's go for a more perhaps fun example. Is Disney now a tech company or is it a media company? It's both, isn't it? No, it's got a streaming service. It has to build the tech infrastructure to run that service, but obviously it's got the studios and all the media part that we all kind of associate with Disney. We do a bit of fun gossip as well. We've done awards.
Sure.
We've done awards season. We've spent plenty of joyous time discussing how wonderful Ted Lasso is. We've had some fun as well, but there are big discussions that are kind of worth having, I think, and I'm glad that you and I hope others find them useful. One of the conversations that you picked out, the one about Facebook, which I agree is really important, but another one that we really enjoyed, I found really enjoyable, was the idea that Apple TV Plus could have been banned across Europe. The Irish government introduced some legislation that could have seen that happen, and so I spoke to Adrian Weckler, who is the tech editor at the Irish and Sunday Independent, over in Ireland, and he explained the whole situation and kind of again hinted at quite how messy some of this could become. So yeah, we've had some really interesting conversations.
Our conversation with Charlotte Henry of Media Plus continues in the next edition of MacVoices, where we get into a discussion of Amazon, the recent bid they made for NFL football, and a whole lot more. That's next time on MacVoices, and I hope you will join us. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.